So I wanted to talk a little bit about detransitioning and specifically the time I almost detransitioned because I feel like lately it's been something that cis people have been, I guess, hyper focusing on, and it's something that they're sort of morbidly interested in. And a lot of the narratives, I feel like they have this sort of quiet um, disrespect for trans people and this sort of background message of no trans person should transition and all trans people are just like essentially their gender assigned at birth and there's nothing you can do about it. And I wanted to provide a counterpoint to that narrative, I guess. And I realize it's only my experience, only one anecdote, but throwing my 2 cents in for whatever it's worth. So when I was 17, I was in a really bad place emotionally due to a multitude of reasons. Namely, I wasn't on T yet. I hadn't started medical transition in any capacity. I didn't start T till I was 18, and at 17, I was still in my junior year of high school. I was still a minor, and I couldn't get on T without my parents' consent, so I was not on T. And going off of that, my parents were mostly unsupportive. At that point, they were still calling me by my birth name and by she, her pronouns. I was out to them, and I had been out for about a year, but they were very resistant when I came out to them, and they essentially said that they believed it was a phase and that they would never see me as a man because they perceived me as very feminine, and that so they essentially went on with calling me she, her, and their daughter, and by my birth name and things like that. Another thing was I was going to an all girls school, so every day, um, even with people who supported me, I was still being misgendered in groups frequently by people calling us ladies or things like that. Um, and my school got a lot better in my senior year, but in my junior year, I was the first trans person to ever come out while attending my high school. So they were sort of going through growing pains after I came out in that regard. They were not ready for trans people to exist, and they were sort of like reeling from like, should we still consider ourselves an all-girls school? And the solution they came up with during my junior year was push this down, make sure this is not a scandal. And so they put these weird rules in place that were supposed to deter teachers from calling me by my chosen name and chosen pronouns and things like that. And just in general, I felt a lot of hostility from the administration and from some other students. Most of my fellow students were really supportive and kind to me, but some of them I just felt deeply uncomfortable around, and just a lot of hostility coming from them. So I was starting to lose hope that I was ever going to be supported in any way, pretty much. I did have friends who were supportive, but they were all my age, and they had essentially no power in how I was perceived by the wider world. And namely, I was worried that my parents didn't love me anymore because I was not a girl. And I thought that the only way they could love me was if I was their daughter again. Now, they aren't horrible people, so they didn't ever outright say, we won't love you unless you detransition. But that was the sense I got from them because they were resistant to me transitioning, and my mother especially got really emotional whenever I brought up trans things, and she would beg me not to transition. Both of my parents would try to convince me that I wasn't actually trans or give me reasons as to why they didn't believe that I'm trans. And so I was feeling really lonely, pretty much, is how I can sum it up. I was feeling really lonely and abandoned by the people in my life and by society in general, and I was starting to lose hope that I would ever be accepted or that as who I felt I was. Um, so I was super depressed at this time, and I started to feel like living as a guy was not worth what I viewed as having no one who loved me. I knew that my friends loved me, but I also sort of felt that they didn't understand me, and which is understandable because all my friends were cis, so they can't directly relate to me on that level, and I wouldn't expect them to because they're not trans. But um, I, the fact of it was, I didn't really have anyone who I felt I could honestly talk to about this kind of thing, um, and that left me living incredibly isolated. And I also thought I would never find romantic love as a trans person, because I thought that if I didn't medically transition, then I would either kill myself because I was so dysphoric, or anyone who was with me would see me as a girl. And I thought that if I medically transitioned, which was what I wanted to do, then people of any gender and any sexual orientation would find my body disgusting, and that I would be sort of like an untouchable, kind of in a bad way, kind of person. So what I ended up doing after a long time of feeling this way was I ended up writing a short letter saying that I had made a mistake and that I was actually a girl and I was not trans, and it ended with me asking people to resume referring to me as my birth name and with she, her pronouns if they weren't already doing that. And I was going to post it on all of my social medias, and I was going to sort of give a speech version of it to my parents and the rest of my family and just other people who I wouldn't, like teachers and things like that. And my plan specifically was to live as a lesbian, which I identify as a gay man now. So at the time, I thought I was bi, but all this is really complicated, and I'm sorry. I knew at the time that I was attracted to men, but the idea of being in a relationship with a man as a girl was just completely revolting to me, and the thought of it made me nauseous. And I thought that um, being I wanted to only be in relationships where the gender dynamics were more fluid and ambiguous, and so I thought a lesbian relationship would be more like that. And to be completely clear, I still knew with 100% certainty and clarity that I was a boy. This wasn't me actually thinking I had made a mistake. I was absolutely certain of who I am. I felt like this was what I needed to do to survive. I felt so lonely and scared in my day-to-day life that I didn't know if I was going to make it to 18 if I didn't do something drastic. And so one night I had my finger literally hovering over the mouse pad to click send on this letter I had written, and I just couldn't. And the reason I couldn't was because I knew it was sentencing myself to death, which I know sounds extreme, but I can assure you it is not an exaggeration. I knew if I went back to living as a girl that I would kill myself eventually. It was just a matter of when in this next, say, 5 years or so. And I didn't think I had a bright future as a guy either. And I wasn't entirely certain that the sheer loneliness and isolation of it wouldn't drive me to do the exact same thing if I did go forward with medically transitioning. But there was still a little part of me in the back of my head that wasn't ready to give up on myself, and that still wanted to try. And so I ended up deleting the letter, and I went on like nothing had happened. um, so I'm dead certain that if I had ended up posting the letter, I would not be alive today. I know that's hard to grasp for someone who isn't trans and who doesn't experience dysphoria, how dangerous dysphoria is. For me, it wasn't like a constant crushing agony like some people describe it, but it was sort of like grinding a piece of chalk up against a chalkboard back and forth, little by little, grinding it into a nub. So every time someone called me she, every time I saw my face in the mirror, every time I took my clothes off to shower, I would just feel this deep, dull, queasy feeling. And the best way I can describe it is as being homesick, but you're already at home, like this bottomless yearning for some place you can't go, but also knowing that you shouldn't feel this way and being angry at yourself for not being able to just be happy the way you are. And I think my desire to detransition was partly out of that misplaced anger at myself. I think I still kind of thought I was crazy, and that if I just tried harder, if I could just do my makeup better, if I could just find the right way to wear girls' clothes, if I could just all of that stuff, if I just tried harder, I could be a normal girl. Um, but obviously, I didn't do that, and I went ahead with transitioning. And I recognized the person I was back then as myself, but the core of myself and how I see myself now was buried under these layers and layers and layers of severe depression and constant low grade dissociation from my body and my mind. Um, and don't get me wrong, I have had some really bad times since starting T, um, which, by the way, was about a year and 5 months ago now. But those bad times feel situational mostly, just a reaction to things that are happening around me. Um, and more importantly, they are temporary. I know how to pick myself up from a rut, whereas beforehand, even the slightest things would send me into an uncontrollable spiral of depression and suicidality. And I recognize now also that most of the fears I had about transitioning were just me catastrophizing. My parents are not only accepting of me now, they are actively supportive and they are proud to call me their son. So it took them a while to come around, but they did. And, the process was gradual and everything, and it took a lot of patience and persistence from me. But, now they're some of the best parents a trans person could ask for. And I also have a much easier time navigating romantic relationships now, because beforehand I just really couldn't face romance in any way because I was so disconnected from myself and I hated my body and the way I looked so much. And just the idea of someone being attracted to me was enough to make me not attracted to them, if that makes any sense. Um, so, but now that I'm actually starting to feel okay about my physical body, and now that I feel way more in tune with myself, I'm actually able to, date. And um, it's actually been working out for me. I'm single right now, but I've, yeah. I'm just more able to connect with other people in general, not only within romantic relationships, but also within my platonic relationships and my family relationships and all that sort of stuff. Um, I also, of course, graduated high school, um, and I got to college, and I'm actually mostly stealth in college now. So, yeah, I didn't intend to do that, but by the time I got to college, I was a few months on T, and just I was passing suddenly, and I was like, wait, I didn't know I was passing. Am I passing? And that was a really weird adjustment to make, but so yeah, a lot of my friends know that I'm trans, but with most people that I come across casually, or most of my acquaintances, or even some of my friends, just they think I'm a cis guy. So I do want to be clear that transitioning is not a magic fix by any means, and it won't just make you better all the way overnight. I'm still a deeply flawed person with a lot of baggage, but at the end of the day, overall, the difference is I can call myself a happy person, and I can actually picture my own future instead of only being able to imagine one where I'm dead. Um, and the world actually feels like a place I can live in where I have opportunities and goals and dreams and things like that. Um, so I guess bottom line is that the fact that I almost detransitioned wasn't because I'm not trans, but it was because I was desperate and I didn't feel accepted by the world, and I didn't feel loved by the people who were most important to me, and I just needed to feel like I belonged and that I wanted to be normal again. Um, and I'm not saying, of course, that it's that way for all people who detransition or even most people who detransition, but I think it's really dangerous to view all detransition narratives as one that means trans people are all lying to themselves. And I think that if you do believe that about detransition narratives, then it likely means you're coming at those narratives with a previous bias and that you're looking to sort of form them into something that supports your own worldview as opposed to coming to them objectively, looking at the facts, looking at the actual statistics of detransition, which are very, very low. Um, and I would encourage you to rethink things, and I would encourage you to listen more to the vast majority of trans people who are much happier after transitioning and who feel much more like themselves. So that's all I wanted to talk about pretty much. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.